Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we are looking at Fire Lord Zuko. Now there's a lot of different strategies we can do with this card. He's very flexible, and I even found a couple cards that just absolutely break him. We're going to get into all of that today, but first a word from our sponsors. So super excited to announce I'm now partnering with Baron of Dice to bring your TCG accessories to the next level. These deck boxes are put simply just eye-catching. I'm obsessed with the leather exterior on these. It just makes the art look super unique, and that's what you're looking for whenever you're trying to show off your deck. The playmats are also super high quality. They have a non-slip backing along with hand-stitched edges featuring that eye-popping art drawn by legendary artists in the space like Ron Spencer. They're also giving me a 5% discount code for all of you guys in the audience. Again, thank you Baron of Dice for sponsoring this channel. You guys can also click that whatnot link in the description down below. You'll get a free $15, and you guys can always get 10% off all of your Tolarian Library proxies whenever you use code DT4D or click that link in the description. Now let's get into what Lord Zuko does. This is a 3 CMC creature. He's red, white, and black, which I think makes a lot of sense for the character, especially at the end of the series. He said, Firebending X, where X is Lord Zuko's power. Whenever this creature attacks, add X red mana. This mana lasts until the end of combat. So you get mana at combat. We're going to want to utilize instants and stuff, and there's some other ways we can break this we'll get into later. It also says whenever you cast a spell from exile and whenever a permanent you control enters from exile, you get to put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. And that's what leads to this card just being super flexible. I want to talk about the lore for a little bit and why I think this makes a lot of sense for him specifically. This is the evil protagonist in the anime for the majority of it, but towards the end, he kind of sees his ways. You kind of see, oh, he's damaged. I kind of get it. And then towards the end, he becomes one of the good guys. So the fact that he's represented as red-black, and then later you add the white, I think it makes sense for this card specifically. And he even synergizes with airbending a little bit, which again, I think makes a lot of sense because you even have Aang in the background of the art. The flavor text is today, this war is finally over. So it kind of brings in the peace side of the airbending, and I just think the flavor is really cool. What do you guys think about the flavor in the set overall so far? I am very happy with it, which for someone who loves Spider-Man, the Spider-Man set just missed it for me, so I'm really happy to see this like kind of tying together. I am a little bit of an Avatar fan too, so I don't know if that comes across, but anyway, let's get on to Magic and talk about the cards that are going to be amazing with this guy. There's 3 archetypes I want to talk about with this guy specifically. You have your Storm archetype, you have your Theft archetype, and then additionally, I think he has a very powerful Blink archetype in him as well, and you can kind of combine them all. Don't get too muddy here, because if you combine too much of either of these, you can just end up with a deck that does not work. So I would hard focus on one of these and then sprinkle in the other ones, if that makes sense. Now, what I think is going to be the most powerful archetype for this guy is the Storm archetype. We're going to include your cards that generate a board state whenever you cast non-creature spells, like Monastery Monk. This is going to give you Prowess Monks whenever you cast those non-creature spells. Then we're going to attack with him, generate that mana, and we're going to have a lot of instant spells that allow us to exile the top cards of our library, and then we can cast those instant spells from exile. And not only is this going to generate a board state with our Monastery Monks, it's also going to buff our entire board state up with his ability that says we get to put a counter on everything whenever we're casting spells from exile. Notably, Agatha Soul Cauldron is going to go absolutely hard in this deck. Just giving your creatures activated abilities of whatever ability it is really powerful. Even if an elf finds its way in the graveyard, it's going to be really good in this deck. Now, again, that's going to be the Storm archetype, and we're getting to specific cards later. The next one I want to talk about is Theft. To give you an example, we have Gonti, Lord of Luxury. This is a 4 CMC creature. It says, when Gonti, Lord of Luxury enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. You may cast the exiled card as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it was mana of any color to cast it. So now we get mana fixing, we get somewhere to put all of that red mana, and we get a solid Theft effect that is allowing us to cast things from exile. So it kind of does exactly what we want in the deck. I think this is especially powerful whenever you pair it with the Blink strategy, because remember, he cares whenever our permanents are entering from exile. So whenever we have something like a Felidar Guardian that enters the battlefield and allows us to exile a creature and then return it to the battlefield, that not only gets us an additional ETB, it also triggers our commander to put a 1/1 counter on our entire board state. And that's where the airbending kind of comes in, right? Because airbending, let's read Aang for a second. This is a legendary creature, human avatar ally. When Aang enters the battlefield, you get to airbend another target creature. That means you exile it. While it's exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 rather than pay its mana cost. So now we're exiling a creature to later cast later. later cast later. That didn't make any sense. To later cast. So this is going to allow us to again get our ETBs while casting things from exile. So that's what leads me to believe I think this could be a very powerful airbending deck. We're just going to have to wait for the entire set to really dig into that, but I'm really excited to. The cards that absolutely break this guy are not going to surprise anybody. We have Hellkite Charger. Whenever Hellkite Charger attacks, you may pay 7 mana. If you do, untap all attacking creatures. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So now all we need to do is ensure that Zuko has 7 power and we get infinite combat steps, which sounds like a lofty goal until you realize that Zuko can literally buff himself. So all you have to do is cast upwards to 6 or 5 spells, and that's going to net him enough power to go ahead and just go infinite. There's also some other cards that really synergize with the combo synergies of this deck, like Atali Primal Storm. It's a 6 CMC legendary creature Elder Dinosaur that says whenever Atali attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. So again, this is a solid way to be casting from exile, utilizing the extra combat steps that we're playing and buffing our entire board up because of our commander's ability. Same with Great Train Heist. This is an instant that allows us to get an additional combat step if we cast it during our combat phase. I will say though, there's not a lot of instance that I want to be casting during combat in these colors. It just seems like a way to add mana, so I kind of want that mana to stick around indefinitely. That way I can start spending it on stuff that makes sense for me. So Leyline Tyrant does exactly that. This is a 4 CMC creature dragon that has flying, and you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. Cards like Sword of Hearth and Home and even Sword of Forge and Frontier are also going to synergize with the combat-based strategy. Sword of Forge and Frontier says whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn, and you may play an additional land this turn. Zuko does trigger whenever you're putting those lands into play from exile. So again, another way to get those counters, and another way to trigger his exile clause by casting spells from exile. Sword of Hearth and Home blinks a creature whenever it deals combat damage and allows you to find a land. So now again, this synergizes with the ETB portion. There's a lot of ways you can kind of morph this deck together to do what you want. You just have to decide the overall goal. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor I think is really strong in this deck. This is a 3 CMC legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they get to draw a card. Now this works for everybody, but what I'm really looking at is its activated ability. You can pay 7 mana, 4 of it being generic and 3 of it being black, to discard X cards, exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So again, we're casting spells from exile, triggering our commander and generating a massive board state of whatever our opponents are playing. And then whenever you pair this with the Storm strategy, we probably have a massive board of creatures from all of our Monastery Mentor triggers, right? So it's going to synergize with a lot of the strategies we're talking about here, whether it be combat focused, whether it be exile focused, or whether it be Storm focused. Prosper Tomebound was also a no-brainer here. This is at the beginning of your end step, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card, and whenever you play a card from exile, create a treasure token. So again, amazing in Storm, but really just amazing in any strategy where you're casting a ton of spells from exile. Crystalline Crawler is also a card that keeps coming up, but it's maybe just better than I initially thought. It says you can remove a 1/1 counter from it to add a color of any color to your mana pool. So this is going to work whenever we're casting spells from exile. We get to put a 1/1 counter on Crystalline Crawler, and then we can remove that counter to essentially make a Stormkiln Artist, or a Burgi, if you will, that just generates any color of mana whenever we're casting these spells from exile. So that's also just going to be amazing for this commander, especially if you're leaning into that Storm route. If you don't want to lean into the Storm route, you can lean into the I'm going to generate a ton of mana route and use things like Zenith Festival. This is also going to synergize with making Zuko bigger, which is something I think a style of deck could do. This is a card that says X and then 2 red. Exile the top X cards of your library. You may play those until the end of your next turn. And then it has Harmonize, which is same X and 2 red. Harmonize allows you to tap a creature and help pay for the spell equal to that creature's power. So if we have a lot of power on Zuko, now we can just straight up tap Zuko, cast Harmonize from our graveyard, or sorry, Zenith Festival from our graveyard, exile a ton of cards, cast them all, and generate a massive board state. Again, I think this is good in any strategy, especially Storm, because because he does put counters on himself. So I think this is just going to be a mainstay in the deck. You have Embrace the Unknown. I think this is also going to be a mainstay in the deck. It's a 3 CMC sorcery that says exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, and then it has Retrace, meaning you can go ahead and discard a land card and cast this spell from your graveyard. So it does the Storm thing by itself while exiling cards from the top of your library. Bergie is also incredibly strong. This card works with the Storm aspect, and it even works with the needing cards to cast from exile aspect. The front of this card says whenever you cast a spell, you get to add 1 red mana to your mana pool, so it even works with like the Leyline Tyrant effects. It also says whenever... You can also cast it for its flip side to discard a card and exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So again, it turns all the cards into your hand essentially into 2 cards as long as you have the mana to cast them. I'm excited to hear your guys' idea for this commander. I am going to wait till the full set release. I think an Airbender style deck could be really fun. Again, I think the most powerful is definitely the Prowess Storm aspect of the deck that's just going to allow us to generate a massive board state and buff that board state up at the same time. But again, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this in the comments down below. And how excited are you for this set? Because I'm pretty excited.